Uh, well, this is sometimes I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm sure my students wish that they could just submit pictures, but I make them submit words all semester long. So one of the best ways to sort of describe what I'm doing in all of my courses, both the DJC100 and the DBR200, are to ask my students to write as much as they can every week, beginning with a series of discussions. And so this is the DJC100 from this spring. There were 13 discussions. The first one in this particular topic was the Langston Hughes poem. And according to the latest composition theory, well, since the 80s and 90s anyways, writing is always considered to be part of a conversation. So during the course I introduced the poem. We spend a lot of time talking about the poem in class. Their first paper is actually an analysis, and so I use this poem as the beginning of the course, in which the instructions for the discussion, and discussion is really a poor description of what this assignment really is. It's not so much a discussion as it is a writing board. Students write better when they are forced to write in public. Our students are extremely adept at this. They're constantly aware of their audience, of their persona that they have to employ in their writing, and when they're writing in front of one another, they tend to write better than they would if they were writing under the old confessorial style of the conversation between a professor and a student. And that nobody else is going to see what they're writing. And so I ask a lot of questions. I ask them to describe the form and structure of the poem. Who's the speaker? The voice in the parenthesis. Who is the speaker and voice in italics? What's the function of these voices? How does the main narrator or speaker of the poem respond? Why does the poet suggest some are not free? Where does the dream of America come from? Where do you think it leads? Feel free to give some examples of groups of people in America who've gained freedom since Hughes published the poem. And feel free to use the list that Hughes gives us, the red man, the poor man, and so forth. Now, all of the students are required to understand that what I'm going to grade them by is this rubric, which asks them to completely address all of the writing prompt questions. And so I score them to the extent that they respond to the writing prompt completely. I also give them credit for adding research. So when they go outside to find additional sources to understand some of these readings, which are admittedly difficult, that they can go outside, but they have to cite those and provide links, either an embedded video or a hyperlink, and to add some citations and references. Quite often these sources will include editorial comments made by editors of the iBook and so forth. I ask them to make a personal connection. What's their connection to this topic or idea, and so forth. And then finally, I'm looking for, this is a formal piece of writing, and so the way they structure their responses is up to them. They can write either in paragraph form, or they can write in bullets, responding specifically to each question so that they make sure that they get all the points. And so each one of these discussions is worth 100 points, and that's the rubric that I use to give it. And so as writing is a process, then as you can see, you get some students who are immediately responding to this assignment. Here's Kelsey's, and she uses these dashes to respond to each one of the questions. She provides an interesting connection to the New Yorker. And when I find these connections, I bring them back to class, and I show this list. Since everybody else can see it, I talk about their responses in class, and it gives me a chance to immediately respond by putting a like. And when I give them a thumbs up, this means that they've scored at least a B+ on this first initial draft. All right. And then I give them some written feedback, as well as talking about the individual responses in class. Here's a student whose first response was not nearly as complete, and as you can see, I gave her some feedback how that it was obvious she'd gone back and edited and revised it, and I thank her for her work. Here's one of my better students who writes in this more paragraph form, but you can begin to see he's using the parenthetical citations in his work. And so this, over the course of the semester, then, this is the form that I'm trying to get all of my students to reply in. And so throughout the semester, particularly in the first half, I'm really on top of the students. Every week, throughout the week, before the assignment closes, I give them critical feedback on how their responses are meeting the requirements of the assignment. Thank God for Speed Grader. Makes it very simple after everything has been submitted. This is a wonderful response here. This is Silka Diet's response. You can see that she really makes the personal connection. She notes that Hughes is not responding to women's rights or concerns in his poem and so forth. And so it gives an opportunity to set certain standards of excellence then that become shared by all of the students as far as what the expectations are in class. So if you get an A, then it's because you sound like Ricardo or like Silka or like this fellow Ben Jackson. Because your writing resembles this. And so I get very few arguments with students when they submit responses that don't get high scores. I just simply point them back towards, let me show you what an A looks like. By the end of the semester then, what I tend to do is I begin to disappear from some of these discussions. And I don't have to intervene all the time. And you begin to see a common set of expectations being met with the parenthetical citations, the references, the links to the outside sources. And so this becomes a public record then. And I encourage my students to use these responses as to form the basis for some of the essays that they'll write as well later in the semester. So I think hopefully that helps.